Hey everybody, it's Marcel here. I wanted to give some thoughts today on beauty, how it is perceived in the world, how it is wielded, even twisted, to kind of get people what they want. And honestly, I want to point out my thoughts on why I see it as a massive handicap in a person's ability to function in society, especially when they get older and that beauty starts to fade away. Now, this is not a wholly new concept. It is something that's been discussed quite a bit, and there's even, for example, a South Park episode almost entirely dedicated to this idea that beautiful people do not accomplish as much, and when their beauty fades, they then have nothing to stand on. And there are several other examples. Well, I'm going to break down why it happens, how it happens, in a little more depth than simply they get lazy. I'm also going to point out ways that it can poison a relationship, may help out some of my blue pill listeners out there in the world. Finally, I'm going to give suggestions on how we can point out occurrences of it in everyday life, and give suggestions on how to handle it where we don't get manipulated quite so easily. By that I mean people specifically using their looks to gain an advantage over us. So let's start out by acknowledging that the perception of beauty can be different depending on the culture or the individual, though fundamentally beauty revolves around the concept of what is healthy and what would generate the best offspring in the end. Regardless of whatever twist we want to put on it as a society, it's based on reproduction. That's why people have a hard time passing off the greasy land whale as beautiful. Though you might find it interesting that there were times in history when actually having more fat was considered desirable, and it came down, as I recall, to survivability. When somebody had a few extra pounds on them, it meant that they were wealthy, they could afford the food, and they were more likely to survive and were honestly more likely healthier. Though that was speculative considering the diseases and things that were going on in the time. I can go into more detail in that later if there's an interest in it. Men can be beautiful in a literal sense, or handsome if you want to call it that, though generally we are judged by our functionality as opposed to our looks in the eyes of women. For example, wealth, power, prestige. Even if one were to argue that a woman would still be attracted to our bodies, it's likely because of our strength, not necessarily just how curvy we are. Strength and capabilities doesn't necessarily have anything to do with a woman's beauty, whereas in a male, if we were muscular but not actually strong, it might be a turnoff. Acknowledging, of course, people's personal taste in the matter when it comes to what they're attracted to, the exception to the norm does not discredit it. Part of the imbalance that occurs in our society is where women are allowed to artificially adjust how beautiful they appear to be. Nobody bats an eyelash when a woman pads her bra and cakes on 10 pounds of makeup, but for a guy, if we were to have a bunch of fake or borrowed money, lie about our income or our finances or something, borrow a car and pretend that we own it, it'd be something we'd be criticized or shunned for. In the woman's case, it's considered acceptable, though this has been going on for a while. Makeup, for example, has been used for thousands of years, though initially it was intended more as a state of hierarchy or a symbol of status, as opposed to being something to artificially inflate someone's value in the marketplace. Though I don't want to get too off topic into a history lesson. The point is that some people are allowed, even encouraged, to lie about themselves and others are not. Did you know there is a bodysuit that men can wear that'll add a huge percentage to their muscle mass? It's designed to give you weight when you're doing your workouts, but distribute it evenly over your muscles. It just coincidentally makes you look like a beast in the process. It makes me picture a scenario in my mind. So guy gets home with his new girlfriend and they get ready to go to bed and she pulls off this kind of a tube corset thing and out flops her spare tire. And he goes, oh, well that's cool. He pulls off his bodysuit and loses like 100 pounds of muscle mass. You imagine the shitstorm that would happen after that? It'd be hilarious. Let the hypocrisy salt mines flow. So why is it that people that happen to be beautiful, either by work, effort, and money, meaning artificially, or by nature and genetics, are ultimately left handicapped? Well, a good place to break that down is to start with day-to-day interactions, primarily, though not limited to, the results of the actions of blue pill men. A subtle example is back when I was in high school, when I'd go to sit down in a new class or something, I would always try and sit down by the prettiest girls I could find. Then I'd be surrounded by pretty girls and I would try harder to impress them, help out more with the assignments, do the extra mile, because I didn't want to look bad or leave a poor impression. Looking back on it, if I were ever forced into a group that either had only guys or had, the girl with their face shoved so far in a book you couldn't see her makeup, I ultimately wound up doing a lot better. But maybe that doesn't count because it was only my personal experience. The point is that guys that are like I used to be make life that much easier for the women who happen to have the looks. Stretch that scenario over the whole of interactions amongst people in society, and you can imagine that some people get catapulted forward quite quickly. Now, when you consider humans, people, and the way they develop within the world, most of it is done within the first 25, 30 years of their life. It's where they develop their skills, their trades, their abilities that they're ultimately going to use for the remainder of their lives. Though that's not true with everyone. My mother got her degree in her 50s. For most individuals, the major skills that they'll put into practice later on in life come from that time frame. So when a woman invests hours every single day either honing skills to make herself look better or simply performing maintenance on what she already has, that's time that could be put into doing something much more productive, like a real-life skill, with respect to people in the modeling industry. Though I'd hope they'd put half of it into savings for an early retirement. Most people's looks don't hold out into their 40s. Perhaps I'm being harsh. I simply don't see it as a good investment. Most people won't be lucky enough to land a good job at a salon or working as a designer or something where beauty skills can be put into practice without possessing beauty themselves. The point is that people will put the most energy into the projects that will give them the greatest yield, that gives them the most bang for their buck. Almost a path of least resistance concept. Though in this case it'd be the equivalent of a person spending hours a day to learn to become a painter and then having their hands fall off at 35. Meanwhile, it's being pushed by society as a good idea and spun as some kind of confidence when in reality it's the lack thereof. Though that may have everything to do with marketing and just getting consumers to buy more products. Finally, you get the toxicity that can develop in an unbalanced relationship that people get in, whereas the woman may consider her looks as something brought to the table in the relationship and put weight or value behind them and consider that as something that the guy has to counterbalance as far as his level of effort. She also may consider the time invested in putting on makeup and getting dressed and performing those maintenance activities as energy put into the relationship, whereas the guy considers it something that he got when he decided to be with her in the first place. I've talked a little bit about that in the past. I plan to make a video here really soon on specifically balancing energies in relationships. I feel like it'd be interesting to MGTOWs and blue pills alike. All in all, as we go through our day, and we interact with others if we so choose to, when a person makes decisions, it's important to step back and consider whether or not we're being manipulated. Developing the skills to point out when a person is trying to manipulate us is no easy task. You can look for physical cues when it comes to women, like is she touching her neck? Is she running her hand across her hips? What is her posture? Is she looking you in the eye? Is she pouting her lips? There's a number of different things you can watch for, but if you're not careful in the process, you're looking over her lips and her hips and her neck, and that can obviously be counterproductive. More of it comes down to self-awareness. That can be easier said than done. Most of us don't take the time to analyze why we make the decisions that we do and reconsider some of them. It starts to feel like self-doubt. It is far easier to understand or analyze the actions of others instead. You don't necessarily see the color or model of the car that you're driving while you're in it. It's not something we necessarily think about, but it's extremely easy to see everyone else's. So here is a straightforward exercise that a person could do if they choose to get kind of a snapshot of their own priorities. Next time they walk into a room with a crowd of people, rather than automatically interacting, hold back and scan the room to make a note of who is talking to who and who is actually talking. Then pause for a moment and decide, if they weren't thinking about it, who it would be that they would want to interact with first, and why. This may be more effective in like a work situation where you're not personally involved with anyone there, more random people, perhaps like a gathering or a party or bar they've never been to before, for instance. That way observations can be more pure and less influenced. Eventually we can make connections between our own behaviors and the behaviors of others and realize the patterns therein, and make choices based upon what we actually want to be or how we want to be perceived. It reminds me of years ago, back before I joined the military. I was in the Civil Air Patrol. An older man that was mentoring me saw me approach a woman while I was in uniform, and I just said hello, and I was being polite. He told me something I've never forgotten, that from everyone else's perspective, especially the woman's, I was coming across as a slobbering puppy looking for a bone, though in my mind I was only being polite. I didn't have to tell him that either. He automatically knew that's what I thought I was doing. Incidentally, she was quite pretty, and it made me contemplate how my actions, my behavior, body language, tone of voice would have all been different if she had not been. Now, it's possible that that was only his perception of the situation. Nonetheless, it made me think. So that's about all that I have to say on this topic today. I want to hear down below if you agree, disagree. This is an open discussion. I try my best to reply when I can, but I do read all of your comments, even the hilarious trolly ones. If you want to hear more on topics like this, like and subscribe. Until next time, take care everybody.